Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're calling in from, zooming in from around the world. My name is Doug Brunke. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Chamber. I'm really pleased today to have an outstanding panel of experts on a topic that's critically important with considering the pandemic that's around the world. And that's, how do we train, whether it's at the university level or whether it's in corporate training, and how do we do that more effectively considering what the world has turned into? And so we have experts talking from different angles of that topic today. And so I think you're going to find it to be fascinating and hopefully useful for whatever you're doing in your profession. I'd like to introduce first Maimun Mustafa, who's the Global Chamber Dhaka and also Global Chamber Barisal Executive Director. He's the one that's really pulled all this together. And so Maimun, thank you so much for doing this. We're looking forward to hearing more.
Thank you so much, Doug, and good day to everyone all around the whole world tuning in today from Dhaka, Bangladesh, the capital of our country. Now, I'm privileged that 4 organizations have collaborated together. That is the local chapters of Global Chamber Dhaka, Global Chamber Barisal, MCAFG, and ICE Business Times, the premier business monthly from Bangladesh, to bring to you this amazing seminar on Globinar, as we like to call it in Global Chamber, about online and SBE, simulation-based education. This is part of actually the second ongoing session of our Let's Disrupt series, where we first talked to you earlier in the summer about COVID, and this time we want to talk about disruption in a far more effective way, about skills and the way forward. So I won't take any more time. I think we have an excellent panel of 4 people from diverse backgrounds coming in, and I'll allow Doug to take the privilege and introduce our first speaker.
Very good. It is my pleasure. Thank you, Maimun. Our first speaker is Dr. Rajiv Agrawal. He's a professor of family business strategy and entrepreneurship at the SP Jain Institute of Management and Research. He's done his own owner-president management program at Harvard Business School. He's the head of strategy group and the author of the first family business simulation of Harvard Business School publishing, titled Honey Heritage. And so to have such an expert with us today to kick things off, we're very honored. Dr. Agrawal, please go ahead.
Greetings from Mumbai, India. Thank you very much, Doug, Maimun, and Amida for having me over here. It's good to be on the same panel as Shashank and Priya. Thank you. I'll just share my slides over here. So I'm going to talk to you about, can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay. So I'm going to talk to you about simulation-based education in higher education. When we look at simulations, I think the first thing which comes to our mind is that of a flight simulator. And this is a snapshot from the Microsoft flight simulator. And we start thinking about, things about how sophisticated and complicated they are. But, amazingly enough, in the last few years, we are seeing simulations playing an increasingly important role in education. I have based part of my presentation from these 2 papers, from which I have taken a lot of data sources. If you look at simulations historically from 1965 to 2018, if you see the research, what you will find is that predominantly a lot of literature has been written in computer sciences, in management and accounting, and in social sciences. And if you look at what has been the largest citations amongst all the papers, you will find that a significant amount is actually coming from medical education. So this is something which is extremely large. But if you see management education, it is still not as much it's maybe about 5 out of 20. So you see this happening in right across the course, that the social sciences are not as much as the medical sciences are. But if you look at specifically higher education, and I'm going to restrict myself on management, we find that most management schools are still using majority of mix of lectures and case studies. So if you look at what exactly is happening with case studies, just let's look at how is management education today being used in B schools. What is a case study involved? It's about small story about what has happened in a particular instance, in a particular management company where a decision had to be taken. So those same facts which the manager faced at that point of time are given to the protagonist. And in the B school, you ask the protagonist, what would you do if you were in that manager's position? And the answer is not important, but what really helps is to cultivate the decision-making process, because then participants have to look at the various range of alternatives which are available. They have to analyze each particular alternative and then come back and decide that which decision they will take and justify that. So this helps a lot, and this has been the traditional method which has been used in B schools from times immemorial. I think from 1908, when Harvard Business School first started using these. And these are the most popular way of teaching management. The only other challenge, the drawbacks that they have is that, there is a pressure of decision making which doesn't come in when you're using cases. The interdependence of different functional areas also doesn't come in. And I think the biggest challenge that I face is that most students are able to give a decision, but they have no stake in the outcome. That they can just make a decision and say, okay, we can do this, we can launch a particular product, but they do not have to bear the consequences of the decisions that they are making. However, if you look at simulations, what you find is that this is completely different. You get an experience of the pressure of real world decisions. You can look at peer pressure and time pressure, which can be experienced. More importantly, any decision that you take, you will have to bear the outcome of that decision, because you will play this across a series of 8 particular rounds. So therefore, whatever decision you take in round 1, you will have to bear the consequences of that in round 2, and then the decisions of round 2 in round 3. So it helps people analyze that, okay, what is the second tier or third tier or fourth tier effects of whatever actions are taken today. And this is something which leads to the possibilities for greater learning. You can, relate it to a framework, or you can actually bring it as a deeper engagement in the classrooms, because people are much more involved. They are much more participative because they understand what is going on. And as a result of which, for these reasons, you are finding simulations becoming exceedingly important in today's times. So the advantages that you have in a simulation is that you can monitor individual performance. Now, what happens in a case study is if you have 80 students in a class, it's very simple for somebody to escape participating in the class, and he or she could choose to just sit back and just hear the discussion without participating in it. There's also the possibility for free riders, that you could have people who are piggybacking on other people's efforts. And you as a instructor will get very worried about how is the class taking it. And all these are actually not, these challenges are taken care of in simulations, because you can monitor each individual person. They can play at their own individual pace, and it forces each participant to consider the outcomes of their decisions. What are the different types of simulations? I could go into depth into this, but I'm just very briefly touching upon this. There could be mini simulations, which could be finished off in one session. There are small simulations, which are a couple of sessions, or it could be something which oversees a large course by itself, and that is a large simulation. You could play it individually, or you could play it in teams, though we find that playing in teams helps to build up group dynamics and study that. You could play synchronous, which is basically all of them play together as a batch, or computer. This could be web-based, server-based, or a single machine-based, or it could focus on a single topic, or it could be multi-topic. So you could have a general management simulation which touches upon aspects like operations, finance, marketing, etc. Features, I think step-by-step play, because what happens is that you can tell them, okay, there are 8 steps to be played. Please stop after the 3rd step, and then you ask the instructor to step in and get involved. And as a result of which, you can measure what is the kind of involvement that is there. More importantly, it gives room for reflection. So it's not the simulation itself, but it forces the candidates to think that, okay, what have I done right? What have I done wrong? How do I improve my performance? And where have I gone? Where have I made a mistake? And the debrief becomes very important. So therefore, the instructor is a central role, plays a very central role in the entire simulation. Let's take a small case study of a simulation that I had made. So, the challenge that I faced was that how do you train business family owners? So these are basically people who are running their businesses today. they need to understand that what is the implication of a decision that I take today, 3 generations away from today. So this could be over a period of 90 years, it could be a period of 100 years. So how do I understand that what is the implication of the decision that I take today? Should I go in for external funding? Should I bring in professionals? Should the family always be on the board? Now, these are decisions which I could not be around and could have an impact on the business. So, and the other thing is, if today you're talking of young successors, they will have to take decisions about choosing between family members, choosing about decisions of the family. These are tough decisions. And how do you train the participants today for something which is going to happen 15, 20 years later on, or something which is going to happen 3 generations down? And that was a challenge that I faced over here. And this was something which we couldn't handle from a case study. This was a framework that we used, which is a 3-circle framework, which is the cornerstone of any family business course. And it talks about basically the fact that every family business has 3 circles: ownership on the top hand side, on the left hand side family and the business, and the protagonist or most family business owners are in the section number 1, where they have to look at all 3 aspects of ownership, family, and business. So this was the framework that had to be used. And what we did was we came out with the Harvard Business School on the simulation on family business. So this talks about, this was what the front page of the simulation looks like. And this talks about 3 generations, and you can see over here. And the degree of complexity increases as you go by generation, but all the decisions which a family makes are brought out extensively over here. We always find that the simulations have resistance, and the faculty think that they are too technical, they're too complex. There are a lot of areas to be covered because you need to ensure that the faculty is going around, mingling with the students, figuring out how they are doing, helping the people who are not doing very well catch up. And these are challenges that faculty have to look at. And the familiarity of the simulation becomes extremely important, because I think this is a sign of the times that you need to understand that this is technology that all faculty have to get used to. On the other hand, why do students resist it? I think they treat it like a game. They're worried about the learning outcome not coming out very effectively. They may not want to disclose poor performance, and I think that's something which you need to worry about as an instructor. It's difficult to hide the free riders, and therefore they may not like it, especially if you're using it as an evaluation tool. But at the end of it, simulations can help in training candidates understand that you can do a range of possibilities and the results of their decisions, and it helps them to reflect on an individual level. It can also be used repeatedly for training. So that's an advantage that you have, that if you make a simulation once, you can use it again going forward. What are the trends? I think we saw that they started in medical school, and it's used mostly in operations and high count areas. But now it is moving more towards the softer sciences and softer sides. So I was amazed to see that there was a simulation on ethics and values coming up in the last 6 months from the Harvard Business School. And I think going forward, increasingly, you'll find simulations looking at the softer aspects of decisions in the near future. So that I'm quite optimistic about the way things are going. What is our experience of using simulations in the classrooms? That students are much more engaged, and the faculty feedback is much more positive. You see very positive outcomes. In the current pandemic, I think when we are forced to take all our classes online, what we find is that as an instructor, using simulations online is a lot easier. It's much easier to organize the group works. Zoom breakout rooms is a boon in disguise, because it helps to access each team very, very easily in breakout rooms. Otherwise, physically going from room to room would have been a nightmare. Online monitoring becomes a lot easier. And faculty can coach weaker teams much more effectively and securely. And if you have a first trial and the faculty are able to use that, then it becomes a lot easier to do repeated classes, because the first time is the most toughest. I'm just going to look at my crystal ball over here and just try to forecast that, okay, where do I see simulations happening in the future? This is a forecast, and I could be wrong in this, but you see a lot more simulations being released in different areas. So these are becoming more and more niche oriented, and they are becoming more specific in nature. And we see technology improving a lot. So it's making much cheaper for people to come and launch simulations based on individual work instead of group work that was there earlier on. Technology is going to make this a lot easier to adapt and develop a new simulation. So you don't require those armies of coding engineers which are required earlier on. And today, individuals can make simulations also today. I suspect it's going to become a lot more easier going forward. And the good thing is that, for example, content providers like Harvard Business Publishing, they have similar backend design. So therefore, if faculty knows how to use one simulation, they're able to use all the others also. So that becomes a lot easier and to use and to adapt. I also see a trend where companies could form their own simulations, after their own courses. So we've seen Google, for example, introduce a course that you can do a 6-month course for $300 online. And the moment you get that micro certification, you can come and join. You're eligible to apply for a job at Google. And I think once this happens, you will see a lot more companies coming back and using customized simulations, which are equipped to cater to the specific needs of what they require their talent to have. And I see this coming as a very, very strong trend in the future. You'll always see training moving online and for becoming more customized to companies and universities. You will see happening even for simulations. And importantly, I'm quite bullish on the fact that introduction of AR and VR would help to tackle the socializing aspect. The problem with online today is that people are very okay about it, but there's something called a Zoom fatigue, which is coming in. And, people are missing the socializing part of it. That I missed chatting with friends. I missed, breakout rooms are not good enough. And I'm forecasting that, with AR, VR, again, we're using technology, but it will be possible to sit and physically see a person virtually. I mean, physically see a person virtually. I know that's a paradox, but you can actually meet up with and socialize with them. And that should take away the biggest drawback that today we are facing with online, that lack of the social aspect of it. On a parting note, I think I would like to quote what Sundar Pichai had said in Google, that history will remember the class of 2020, not for what you lost, but what you have changed. You have the chance to change everything, and I think it's incumbent upon us as instructors and educators and corporates all over the world to realize that simulations is, like Voltaire would have said, the armies of the world cannot change an idea whose time has come, and I think we need to recognize that. The sooner we recognize that, the better it is for all of us. So on that note, thank you very much. I hand it over to Maimun. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Agrawal. Just so that we're on the same page, in terms of the technology you're using for these, what do these look like? Are they off-the-shelf type technologies? And how much work is involved in putting together a simulation?
That's a good question. And in fact, I'm happy to say that these technologies are off the shelf. They are, for example, the one that I'm making right now is actually coming in from game design. So the faster the engines are in game design, there's a lot of development happening on that front. But today, there are platforms like Folio, which with very little limited coding, one can actually put up a simulation in less than 30 minutes. And you don't require any coding experience.
Okay.
So it's become that simple, yeah.
That's great. The simulations that you run in your class, do they run for an hour or a day or weeks? What's the time frame for a typical B school simulation?
Actually, it depends on the instructor and what is the learning outcome that you want. So since a typical course would be for 16 sessions, I think the instructor is challenged to figure out whether the simulation should occupy the entire course or only a part of it. And I think what we are finding is that people are moving away from the 16 session or the 20 session courses for the entire simulation to something which is used only for a single or double sessions itself, because it's much easier to keep the interest alive and to keep that specific learning outcome being achieved from that simulation. But you have all types. You have people who are we're using basically for marketing, we use MarkStrat and InduStrat, which lasts for about 16 sessions. And we also use a lot of single session simulations in multiple subjects.
Outstanding. Dr. Agrawal, thank you so much for sharing. I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page there on some basic information. I'm going to turn it over to Maimun, but I also want to remind everybody, as you have questions, put them in the chat room. We'll have time at the end for those. So Maimun, take it away, please.
Thanks so much, Doug. And Dr. Agrawal, that was an amazing presentation. Lots to take in, but you did an amazing job within, I think, 12 to 13 minutes. Okay, I think talking about the next speaker, it's Ms. Samida Ahmed. Samida is a very special part of the Global Chamber family because she is in our Dhaka and Barisal Advisory Board. But apart from this, Samida is a full-time lecturer at Prime Asia University in Bangladesh. She is an academic educator under Harvard Business School Publishing and Science and Tech Delegate at Harvard Project for Asian and International Relations. Her ongoing research work is on simulation-based education, and it's in an effort to redefine the conventional education system, especially within Bangladesh. Her coursework circulates around experiential simulation learning, which is in an effort to forward a successful university and industry collaboration. And I think that's something that we do complain about a lot, that the academia does not always work with the needs of the workplace. She wants to bring about more competent graduates in the future, and alongside simulation-based education, she also works with medical tourism in Bangladesh. But today, Amita, we want to hear more about this experiential aspect of SBE. So please take it away.
Thank you, Maimun, for the wonderful introduction and for everybody to tune in. Basically, just as COVID-19 hit Bangladesh, there was the UGC, along with the Education and Research Network in Bangladesh. They got together and they introduced policies to make sure that all the universities in Bangladesh are going digital. So within 4 months' time, we went digital, and generally more than 3,800 classes were being conducted online, and 220,000 students were tuning in. In terms of Prime Asia University, where I'm teaching, we basically have our own customized online and teaching platform. It's known as Orbit OCP, and it's been the brainchild of Vice Chancellor, and it's been going great for all of us, the faculties, the students, as well as the lab personals, and we are able to collaborate, share information, grades, as well as schedule meetings. So the reason why this is a little different from the traditional sort of open source is it ensures data protection as well as privacy. So that's been going great for all of us. Am I audible?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, you're good. Yep.
Oh, great. So I'm quickly going to share my screen and share the slides that I've made. All right. Great. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. Thanks.
Okay. So much of the presentation that I am going to carry on moving forward is on the work that I'm doing in Bangladesh. It is a specific form of simulation. It's an experiential simulation-based education. And I'm also going to have touch points on what can be done to bring academia as well as the industry together and to bridge the gap between the two sectors. I think essentially what we really want to know about is how is higher ed at the moment? So higher ed at the moment, for instance, it has weak relation to the realistic practice. Like there's huge gaps that are required knowledge and skills compared to the acquired academic knowledge and skills. We see huge gaps in there. I think generally when COVID-19 hit, the gap became more prevalent and it became more visible. Because it brought in a lot of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. So it had a lot of uncertainty towards the whole situation of what higher education is going to be like moving forward. I think that attention got drawn towards identifying teaching methods that can reduce this gap, as well as developing the professional skills that are required to make sure the bridge between the academic as well as the industry sectors are well met. This leads us to the question of asking the question, what higher ed is going to be like in the future. So I think for the future, we need continuous learning. We need to expand our mental models because that gives us more tolerance. It gives us more flexibility, adaptability as well, so that if you have a pandemic or anything else striking the world again, we are able to well adjust and adapt to the new changes that's going to be brought about. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, simulation as an experiential learning method has really gained a lot of attention. And the main reason is because the theoretical knowledge that we gain from the lecture-based or talk method, that gets combined with the application-based practice. So when we have the knowledge and practice combined together, we have the skills that are desired by the workplaces and the companies, because they need to make sure that the skill sets match to the organization. So the person organization fit, the person job fit, everything gets really fixed and elaborative. There's contextual immersive understanding and learning of the content, which really helps the student a lot. So rather than reading about the experience, the students actually get to be in the experience and learn it by themselves. So I think it's a reverse and a very strong double learning process that takes place when we are introducing simulation in the classrooms. So my work generally circulates around this transition pie, which is the bridging the gap pie. You can see the work integrated learning is a very core subset of experiential learning. Experiential learning can come about through industrial community projects, interactive simulations, capstone projects, on-campus work teaching labs, performance-based learning. From all this type of experiential learning that is provided, the two most constructs that I've picked for my courses are industry projects that gets blended in with interactive simulations. So basically the experiential simulation education in Bangladesh, I have made sure that the classes that I conduct are divided up into 3 parts: the pre-brief, the play or the run, and then the debrief. So the pre-brief basically takes into account the theoretical aspects of education, which is the talk method. The students get to learn about the concepts, the theories, the paradigms, everything that's taught in class in terms of gaining the reasoning skills. On top of that, when we educators are trying to introduce simulation, we give in another layer of application, and that application-based learning is done through the sims. So then we have the actual sim, whichever you pick for your courses, depending on the topic. For myself, because I teach marketing, so I have picked marketing simulation, which are managing segments and customers V3. So this is a simulation where the students get into the shoes of a CEO. It's a single player simulation, and they have multiple levers to pull. They have multiple decisions to make, like price, communication, market research, sales force, product development, product cost. So every time they're going to get a quarterly report on the financial performance based on the play that they've made. So for Q3, your financial performance is going to be based on what decisions you have made as a CEO for the company on Q2. So then you have a chance for Q3 to like upscale or tweak your market share, change your prices, or do another market research. And then in general, you would want to really make sure that quarters by quarters you go in, your company gets in more profitability. So what really happens is the reasoning skills that the students learn from the classes or from the theoretical aspects of the talk method, they're able to apply that in terms of understanding how the simulation takes place. So we are learning something from the class, but most of the cases we don't know where actually to apply that particular simulation. And I think what simulation-based education does, it makes sure that you're putting your reasoning skills into the practical skills. So I was very fortunate to actually learn this simulation, particularly simulation managing segments and customers V3 under Rajiv sir. I was a student learning that at that moment. So this is something I want to bring across to all the educators who've tuned in for today's Globinar. And after that, if you want to implement simulation in your classes, I think what's essentially it's very important is making sure that you are also in the shoes of the students in order to understand the kind of challenges they might be facing in order when they actually take the simulation. So essentially, that is something that an educator can do to make sure that the debrief session is conducted really well. The debrief session is basically where you reflect, you review, and discuss the SIMS activity, and it's usually done in teams so that there is maximum learning. Then there is a company visit that I have incorporated depending on the Bangladeshi culture, where students really prefer to be on the job and really check out how the CEOs are working for a day. or bringing a CEO into the class, and then the CEO shares the experience of what it's like to go on with the daily activities and taking decisions in the company. So it basically is a strong double learning process, and it also ensures that the students are getting the contextual immersive learning experience, which is essentially extremely important to make sure that you have a well-rounded student in the market. This is basically how the experiential learning model takes place. You do the simulation, then you reflect on it, and then you apply your reasoning skills with the practical skills through the sims, and then later when you have the company visit. This is a graph that basically shows the 3 different teaching methods that are ongoing in their current educational fields right now. There's simulation, there's case study, there's lecture. So if we are comparing the means of the 3 different teaching methods through the lens of the taxonomies like problem solving, interpersonal skills, self-awareness, we see a very steep decline in the level of student learning when we are shifting from simulation to the other 2 methods of teaching, case studies and lectures. So this basically gives us an idea on how effective simulation can be to make sure that the students come out learning in a very immersive way. And it also makes sure that it gives you an understanding of what it is going to be like working in a company, so it gives you a real company context. I think such contextual experiences are extremely important for students to learn from their education, because it's eventually going to put them in the workforce and make them very competitive. Now coming to the competence collaboration between industry and academia, I think here we need to have in mind a couple of things, a couple of constructs that needs to be kept in mind. The industry and academia, they have a lot of stakeholders on multiple levels. So in order to ensure that you have a competence initiative development model taking place, there should be sound and consciously designed strategic, tactical, or operational planning. In terms of strategic planning, which is usually for the long term, and the reason why the industry and the academia, they have a huge gap at the moment for blending in, is because I think that the university and industry in their sense of time are far apart. Universities conducting research are primarily interested in the scientific results over a period of time, whereas on the other side, the companies, they really want to make sure that they're able to use those scientific results right now at the moment. So I think this sort of time series difference that the industry and academia has can be resolved by, for instance, there are a lot of specialists at the companies who are also adjunct professors at universities. So this specialist adjunct professors can play a very integral part in the competence network. They can be a part of the research institution projects, or in many cases, they can be supervisors of PhD, and they can bring the 2 industry together and make sure that there's a network that's being built up. In terms of tactical planning, I think the company must really see that the collaborative projects are important. With the universities or with research institutions, it really brings in innovative ideas for the companies. One good example for tactical planning can be the industrial PhD candidate. They basically, what they do is they have this joint university industry research projects, and they get into that, and they serve as an important link between the 2 parties, industry and academia, and they build up a network between them and bring them together. So internships or sort of PhDs like industrial PhD can act really well. I think it's going to blend in really well with the tactical planning. Moving on for the operational planning, I think the companies, they need to see value in the students. Industry, they really need to invest their resources in universities where they see a student as a potential future employee for their company, and also looking to them as opportunities for non-conventional ideas, which can also give the company an unbiased input, which are still really important for companies to really have the development within their network and for company growth and traction. One example for operational planning can be the Cyrus project that takes place at Luleå University in Sweden. So it involves teams of students who carry out a product development project. And they do that in close collaboration with an industry partner. So as a result, what happens is this industry and academia, they have this network that it brings them in together. And what really essentially it does, it allows the students to really have an experience, a real company context experience, which is very important for them to build them up in terms of making sure that they're learning from the experience and not reading the experience, and they're able to apply their reasoning skills from the theoretical knowledge that they learn all throughout the undergrad tenure. They're able to apply that when they're on the job. In terms of companies, I would say it's a win-win situation for the companies. They are able to undertake low risk exploration studies of new concepts, which might give them a market lead to some extent. Essentially, I think understanding that both the company and the academia, if they're blending it together on collaborative projects, it brings in a lot of development for the economy. I think essentially understanding that part is what really gets 50% of the work done. Almost towards the end of my presentation, this is what the world looks like right now. We are all using laptops, internet, computer, and we are all sitting down doing virtual meetings. We're doing virtual classes. I think it's really COVID-19 has brought in a lot of us together. So two key takeaways from my presentation tonight is going to be, the first thing is going to be technology. I think the virtue of technology in the classroom is that it requires a user and not a watcher. As a result, when COVID-19 came in, I think it made all of us an active user of technology. And as a result, we are being able to look beyond and find out teaching methods that are going to be immersive to make sure that academia and educational institutions are blended in together. The second takeaway is going to be the strive that we have for a well-rounded 360-degree graduate. I think in order to find those desired skill sets, we need to be fast tracking with simulation, because that really essentially makes the graduates very competent, because they're able to understand how their reasoning skills apply to the practical field. And also collaborative projects makes the industry and the academia come together. So more collaborative projects, internships, PhD supervisors connected to the industry will really help fast track the process. And that is what I'm trying to do in Bangladesh by making sure that there's experiential simulation-based education brought forward in the educational landscape in the country. Thank you for giving me the floor, and I'm open to questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamida. And showing a computer that's pivoting is a great analogy to what many of us have had to do in education and in business and in life, considering where we are today. So thank you for sharing. We have some questions, but we're going to save those to the end. Our next speaker is Shashank Srivastava. So correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sorry. He's a digital transformation consultant at Microsoft. And so obviously, or I think we all know that digital transformation today is changing the world. It's become suddenly something that was a future thing to do, very present. So we look forward, Shashank, to hearing more about your perspectives there over at Microsoft.
Thank you so much, Doug. You pronounced my name correctly. Just wanted to get that out there.
Thank you.
I'm just sharing my screen. Give me a second. Do let me know once you can see it.
It looks great.
Right. Hello, everybody. My name is Shashank, and I'm talking about education, corporate, the gap that exists between the two, and how to bridge the gap that exists, especially for job seekers today. So let's get started. As we all know, this infamous gap that has existed between education and corporates It's not unheard of. In fact, it's very, very old. And it's not something that has come with the digital age. It's not something that COVID has brought with itself, right? Although we can blame COVID for the fact that it has exacerbated the situation, but it has existed since time immemorial, right? And my understanding of why this gap exists, I try to sum it up by calling the unfortunate mismatch of the entire ecosystem. That is how I define it. This is in no way, the exhaustive list as such, but it tries to cover the major drivers. So the mismatch that exists, it starts from supply and demand. A good example of this would be, third world countries where supply of labor is very high, but demand from the corporate side is not as much. On the flip side, we could also talk about some specialized skills or niche skills that people might, that the employees might be looking at, but there is not enough skill set to, to provide the value, right? So this unfortunate mismatch is number one. We move on to the modern and traditional, where the expectation from the corporate point of view has completely been state of the art and modern, whereas some of the pedagogy and study methods that are used in institutions, in fact, most of them still follow the traditional approach, which is not able to sort of go well with the modern requirements that a corporate has. And that leads to the expectation mismatch between the students, between the job seekers and job providers. I think Ms. Tameda touched upon this topic earlier, but the gap also exists between the theoretical aspect of things in the education sector versus practical approach or application and implementation in the corporate side. And ultimately, we have the cost benefit gap. Tuition expenses are extremely high. We have all heard about debts and loans, but the benefits that it provides to students is not always so much, right? In terms of preparing them up for the upcoming jobs, making them understand digital technologies, it has not been so good thus far. So this is what I call the unfortunate mismatch, and this covers the major spectrum, although there might be some points that I'm not aware of. But this is, in my view, why this gap exists and what is it made up of. Moving on, we have how COVID-19 has changed this landscape. Like I said earlier, it has exacerbated the situation, and we are all witnessing the change in multiple industries. Education and the corporate side is no exception, and the impacts that have happened, they're both huge as well as long term. The gap has widened, and we are going to essentially look at this in terms of two buckets. We'll focus on the corporations first, and then we'll move over to the educational institutions. So from corporations perspective, what has COVID-19 done? We know that COVID-19 has sent shocks through the world economy. We know that there are a lot of companies that have been disrupted. Most of the companies, majority of the companies, they're trying to figure out new business models, new strategies to make sure that they survive once this uncertainty is over, and even right now. So some of the impacts I've listed down here that COVID-19 has caused on corporations. It has caused supply chain disruptions, as we all know, which has ultimately led to cost fluctuations, thereby hitting the top line as well as bottom line of different companies, which has ultimately resulted in customer churn, right? A good example of this is ride-hailing services. Some of the companies, big companies that we know, the likes of Uber and WeWork and other such companies, have borne the brunt of this really bad. Then there are digital transformation challenges where the infrastructure of a company is on-prem and they're finding it increasingly hard to move to cloud. One of the biggest hit part of the entire corporate side are the employees, which has they have finally been they're ultimately losing their jobs. There are a lot of layoffs, a lot of furloughs that are happening, and the companies that are unluckiest, they have not been able to survive it, leading to their complete shutdown. So these are some stats that I have pulled up. COVID has costed the world economy close to $1 trillion already. 94% of the Fortune 1000 companies are seeing disruption, which is huge. And this is from India specifically. About 200,000 IT employees will be losing their jobs in the future. This is a projection. From the aviation industry standpoint, 90%. I'm unable to see this because my video is flashing here, but 90% of the global fleet of aviation industry were actually grounded, but now they've started to take flight again. And this is a stat that I found on statista.com. It talks about, they interviewed some SMEs and startups in India, and about 7% of them said that they have supply disruptions. 30% said that they have lower demand, and 41% are suffering both. Now, there are also companies that are shock proof and they've been able to deal with COVID pretty well. So about 11% said that they had no impact whatsoever. And then there was the remaining 11% that could not figure out what are the exact implications that COVID-19 has caused on them. Moving on to the academic side, we know that education has also been one of the worst hit industries. Most of the institutions, including schools and colleges and universities, they have almost gone a near total shutdown. Although the coin is flipping a little bit now, we are witnessing soft openings in major part of the world now. In fact, I have an interactive that will demonstrate that in a bit. So the impact that COVID-19 has caused on the academic front includes classroom suspensions and interrupted learning. Now, due to the lack of digital infrastructure, there are a lot of problems that have arisen. Most of these educational institutions were running their classes on campus and they did not have a digital alternative. So now they are facing a complete lockdown or a near complete lockdown and not able to run their classes properly, which has finally resulted into salary cuts for teaching and non-teaching staff. Another major problem that students are facing are nutrition and childcare. And this has all resulted into psychological impacts for all the stakeholders, not just the students. Again, some key statistics. So around 1.6 billion learners have their education disrupted, which amounts to about 98% plus students. There are 100 plus countries that have implemented nationwide closures. And this data is a little old. It's a month old actually. And then there are 50 plus countries that have gone into partial lockdown education wise. Now this is the interactive map that I was talking about a minute ago. This was present on UNESCO's website and they update this on a daily basis. So this snapshot has been captured 2 days back, 2nd of September. And they have bucketized the entire world based on, 4 different categories that are partially open, closed due to COVID-19, fully open, and on academic break. So you can see that about half of the countries are partially open here. But then there are major parts of South America and India and other such countries that are still completely closed, educationally speaking. And then there are some parts that are fully open, whereas others which are on an academic break. Moving on to the next part, which is braving the new reality, both from the education point of view as well as corporate. So I'll be talking about corporate first. So corporations are trying to go digital. It's not a newly heard thing. They have been trying it earlier as well. But like Doug mentioned earlier, our CEO Satya Nadella mentioned this, that we have been able to achieve digital transformation of years within 2 months, because majority of the companies are trying to go digital. Work from home has become a new norm for all the employees of various companies. Now, of course, this privilege cannot be enjoyed by all, but people that can afford to work remotely, they are doing so. The corporations are also redefining customer experience because customer touch points have changed. They have predominantly become online. They have this responsibility of looking after the well-being of employee, both physical as well as mental. And so they have come up with different programs to ensure mental wellness and exercising and right diet plan and other such incentives to make sure the employees' health is intact. Financial stability is a key measure that they want to look at to make sure that they can, if things go worse, they can still survive it. And ultimately, they are imagining everything, right? All the way from their business models and strategy to innovation and R&D. So that was about corporates. Now we are moving on to the education sector. Education as well has gone digital. Classes are happening remotely and online. So there are new courses that have been launched. Case in point, IIT Madras, which is one of the most reputed and biggest universities in India for engineering. They have launched this bachelor's in science program. That's just a quick example to show how a full-fledged degree is coming online now, where education institutions can afford to do that. Then we have new AI ML solutions, and this is from the industry side, which are typically educational solutions to make sure that the education in this new world becomes more interactive, more coherent, more integrated, right? And some of my venerable panelists also mentioned about the simulated based education, right? So especially nowadays, it is really relevant, and leveraging technology can really help in this regard. Some of the soft skills and other teacher-student relationships that can be augmented might rely on emotional intelligence and other such as softer aspects of software. So that is also keeping into account. And ultimately, we have government who's a major stakeholder, and it's imperative for them to make sure that the policies and the laws that they draft around education takes into consideration of all the factors that I just mentioned. That brings us to the last segment, which is for the job seekers. So as we know, the hiring has gone from okay to no nonsense, because companies cannot afford to pay a lot, especially during COVID. So now more than ever, companies are forced to focus on no nonsense hiring, where only someone who can add value with their skill sets are hired. Everyone else is having a hard time. And therefore, I thought of coming up with this a really simplistic framework, which might help people that are looking for jobs to grab one. I would suggest you begin by identifying what the corporates or what the employers are looking for. Go online, try to figure out the pattern, try to see what skill sets are needed in today's reality, and make sure they align with your interest areas, because that's the only way to have a sustainable job. From there, you move on to preparing yourself. Try to keep yourself up to date. Keep upskilling yourself regularly. There are lots of resources that are available online now. So this step can be taken care of that way. Then we have demonstrate, and we have some great LinkedIn like social media platforms where you can demonstrate your skill sets to make sure that the employers or the corporates are interested in you, and you finally close the deal that way. That is how you convert the job. So that was all from my side, guys. Thank you so much, and I'll pass this back to Mamu.
Shashank, thank you. I think we learned a lot, which spoke about the second angle of today's Globinar about online education. We will come back to you with pertinent questions after, of course.
Sure,
let's move on to our fourth speaker. And this is Priya Bhandari. Priya is also from the Microsoft family, and she's an Azure Cloud and AI consultant. And she assists businesses globally by digitizing and streamlining the business processes by developing cloud applications. She works primarily on mobile application development and helps companies develop cloud-ready solutions. So she's a fervent supporter of diversity and inclusion. We want to see how this can actually, this inclusion of, trying to navigate through, university and going on to the workplace, because I was having a conversation with her about how she was recruited in her university and college days. So Priya, would you like to take it over?
Thank you so much, Shaw. Please confirm if you can see my screen.
Yes, we're good.
All right, thank you so much. So hello everybody, my name is Priya Bhandari, and trust me, those were some really difficult presentations to follow up, and I just hope that I deliver to the skill, to the sort of the expectation that has been built up. So as rightly mentioned by Shashank, he's touched based upon how you can prepare yourself, to get into a corporate world. Well, I will be talking a little bit about the aftermath of it, as to once you are into the corporate world and because of the new shift in reality, how do you navigate effectively through the virtual corporate world? So let's quickly look at what are the certain things that have changed majorly due to COVID-19, and these are certain key elements that we all could think about. So the onboarding process, which usually happens for any new joinee or any new hire, has now completely gone virtual, and it's a very important part of any corporate journey, because this sort of is an introduction to the company. You understand the vision, the goal, and the mission of the company. So that becomes a very important event, which has now completely gone virtual. Following the onboarding, there are a lot of trainings and workshops that usually new joinee, especially if you are a student who have just graduated and you are just entering into the corporate world, there are a lot of trainings and workshops that you undergo in the first 6 months of your job, and all of them have now become virtual. Networking. Now, I personally feel that networking is a very important tool for any successful corporate, corporate lifestyle or corporate employee. And it's good to have that pool of resources that you can always tap into when you need some sort of help. And all of this now has to basically happen virtually, since you don't have the luxury of running into people in an office lobby or a cafeteria. And all of this is now moving to a virtual setup. So these are a little bit of formal changes, but informally, we also see a growth in the coffee conversations culture, which is sort of like a quick informal way. You know, coffee is just used, but the idea basically is that you sort of bring some food or something that you want to drink, and then you're just informally getting to know your teammates, your project mates, and just understanding them outside your workspace. And that inevitably helps you foster better team connections. The team comes together a little close, and you obviously start working better with them as you understand more about them outside your work. Then there's also virtual team building activities that a lot of companies now invest into, and it can be both formal or informal. And all of this again ties back to the idea of sort of bringing the team together, which probably people are working from different continents even, and you sort of have to work with them for a longer period of time, and there's this need for you to understand who they are so that you understand the kind of work that they do. One very key important point is that we need to understand that this is a situation which is not here just for 6 months. There's a good possibility that a lot of companies are thinking about going remote completely. COVID-19 has made corporate realize the benefits of remote work or working from home. And there's a good possibility that they might continue to do so even after we surpass the pandemic stage. And they might either have a hybrid model or might completely go online. So these are certain things that could actually become the new normal. Now, this is what has changed from the corporate end. But what are some of the challenges that the new joinee or a student who is just entering into the virtual corporate world might face? And let's look at quick few points. Now, these are certainly challenges which I myself have faced in the last 5 months when we sort of shifted to this entire work from home model. Time management is something which is extremely crucial. And when you're working from home, it becomes very easy to sort of, those boundaries can become, a little less clear when you don't have that office that you're traveling back from. And then you know that, okay, now I can put all of that behind me and I can just focus on my family, on my personal life. And that becomes a little bit of challenge when you're working from your own place. Asking that first questions. Now, this is something that I've seen a lot where a lot of people feel really comfortable in having in-person conversation, but when you take that and move that setting a little virtual, they feel a little hesitant to come out and ask that first question. And that's another challenge that we can look at. Staying focused. Now, this is really funny because I'm sure you all have seen those videos where you see somebody doing a video conference meeting and maybe their pet comes up or their child comes in, or you see their grandma wearing the most weirdest costume and just going around in the background. And it's difficult when you're in your house and then you have to stay focused at your work as well. So how do you sort of balance that both? Miscommunication. Now, we're all, I feel that we're all very comfortable when it comes to having a verbal conversation or when we're talking to people and when they know us in reality or in person. But when you take that all onto a textual concept where you're only texting somebody, where somebody knows you only virtually, how is it that you make sure you have that clear line of communication so that you're not misinterpreted or your communication is not taken otherwise? That is another key challenge that we have to look. And finally, and the most important thing is adjusting to the virtual work. I think it was Dr. Rajiv who had mentioned in his presentation about having that human touch that we all really strive for and we really crave for. How is it that we can adjust to this entire working from home scenario? So these are the few challenges that really quickly popped to my head, and let's quickly see what we can do better to mitigate them. Work prioritization. The moment you talk about having a good time management, the necessity of prioritizing your work so that you understand what needs to be done and what can be put later on is extremely important. Remember, we spoke about asking that first question, and this is something that I really suggest a lot of people to do. That if you're not very comfortable to talk and ask your question, maybe in a virtual setting, most of these video conferencing tools have a chat support. Go ahead and put in your text over there, put in your question over there, and more often than not, people do recognize that chat medium and they end up answering your questions. And I've seen more often than not that when people get recognized through those chat mediums, slowly they build enough confidence to come up and actually ask the question by themselves. So this could be one quick tip that you could use. In order to stay focused, in order to know how to effectively work and have that healthy work-life balance, it's very necessary that you build clear expectations with your stakeholders. Now, what does that mean? It means that you let them know what timings work for you. It's important that you let them know that there's somebody who's dependent and you are the caregiver for them. So there's a dedicated time schedule that you work with. It's very important to have those clear expectations set beforehand, because it just helps the person ahead to understand your work day a little better, and thereby we are all in this process of making work from home a little easier for each other. So clear and transparent communication, it seems very simple, and a quick tip from my end for doing that is that we have a whole lot of emoticons available to us, and I for one feel that if you can use them professionally, it's a great tool to have, where you can make sure that whatever you're seeing doesn't get misrepresented, and you can very easily use emoticons where you see that maybe it could pair very well with whatever you're talking, and make sure you have that clear and transparent communication with people that you might not know in person and are only connected to virtually. Reimagining your home workspace. This is a very close to my heart kind of point, because when I initially started working, I did not have the space that you right now see around me. And it used to get very difficult because I used to work, I used to have my laptop on my bed, and the moment I used to wake up, the first thing I'm doing is I'm checking my mails. And the last thing that I do before I go back to sleep is checking my mails. And there was no clear boundary that when am I going to stop working, and which is extremely unhealthy, and it could result in fatigue. So having a clear space, whatever is feasible to you, maybe a small corner in your room, have a small sofa, or maybe just put whatever you like around yourself, but have a clear space defined that this is where I work. Because the moment you leave that space, you know that I'm off work now and I can focus on my personal life, and you can achieve that healthy work-life balance that we talk about. And it is very imperative that we build these skills now, because because I mentioned at the very beginning that most companies are looking at being remote or being virtual for an extended period of time. And this is very well the reality that we will all have to embrace, not just for the next 6 months, but probably for the coming 2 to 3 years. One additional suggestion, because I mentioned that I thrive for being inclusive and to make sure that your work is accessible. And now that everything is online, it's even more critical that when you're sharing something, when you're it could be a PPT or it could be a Word document or whatever it is, make sure that you include everybody and that the content that you share is accessible. And 2 quick pointers on how you can do that is to check the accessibility. Now, most of the editors that we use today have this universal tool to check accessibility. Apart from that, you also have a lot of websites where you can put in your content just to make sure that you have your alternative text added to the image, or maybe if you're sharing a bright image, the contrast is set accordingly so that a screen reader can read it. Because whatever content you're sharing, you don't know what kind of audience it is even going to. So it's always better to be a little more thoughtful about it. And the last point is hit pause before you hit send. Take that extra 2 seconds before sending out an email, before sending out a memo, and just see, is it accessible to everybody? Is your language gender inclusive? A simple example could be that a lot of us use, hey guys, how are you? Now, guys is not a gender inclusive term. No matter what you guys want to contest it with, it's not gender inclusive. So use something like, hey everyone, or maybe something else, or just completely drop that and just say, hey. Thereby you be a little more sensitive. And the reason why I wanted to put this slide up is that it is accessibility should never be an afterthought. It should be something that you do organically, that becomes ingrained in your system. And which is why I wanted to dedicate just one whole slide on this topic. So that brings me towards the end of the presentation. I hope you could get few tips that you could work out for yourselves. And thank you so much. Back to you, Doug and Memnon.
Great info. What do you think, Maimun?
Well, it's amazing. I think we learned a lot. It's a lot applicable to the global tribe. Some practices we can incorporate ourselves.
No question. What I took you from, we now have a few minutes for questions, and we do have some questions in the box. I was struck with what Priya talked about there, where we kind of finished up, where we have the potential of either moving all of our dysfunctionalities into the digital world, or we can pause and not do that and actually create a better world in this virtual world. And so, I mean, is that the way to look at it, Priya? I mean, does this give us an opportunity to kind of society 2.0, so where we can be gender balanced and we can celebrate diversity and we can do all the kind of the right things that we kind of messed up in work, in real life, face to face?
Absolutely. I see a great potential in that. And a lot of it also comes that, so a lot of our biases that we usually have, which is where the entire conversation of inclusivity stems up from, is that we inherently have a lot of biases, and a lot of our biases are actually visual. But now that everybody is gone virtual, we only see their work, we only see their names. You might have video conferences, but that comes in a little later stage. And that gives you a place where maybe you're not being judged upon the way you look, maybe you're not being judged upon for the way you dress or for the way you carry yourself, and you're only being judged upon the kind of work that you do and the way you're presenting yourself. And again, as I'm again going to touch base upon the accessibility point of view, now more than ever is the need to make sure that your content is extremely accessible, it's extremely inclusive, and COVID-19 is giving us an opportunity to do that. And for that to not be an afterthought, but it has to be something that you do from the get-go. So I think there is a chance of a society 2.0 that you mentioned.
Sounds good. Are there some questions, Maimun, that you'd like to ask from the chat room or from yourself?
Sure. I'll ask from the first question from the chat room. I think this is from Larry, Global Chamber, Cincinnati. Larry says that feeling the pressure of the real world, do we actually see things moving lower than higher ed, high school, for example? I think this is a question we can give to Dr. Rajiv.
Yeah, I think the advantage with simulations is that the Gen Next is very, very receptive to it, because this is based on devices, this is based on social media, and in fact, you emoticons, if you want to talk about that, so you use a lot of that. So you will find that a lot of these simulations are used either for kindergarten and thereabouts or in higher ed. In the middle, there is a segment that is still not as extensively used, but I suspect it's going to increase, because I say, as the volumes increase and as the demand from schools increase, they will realize that simulations is a very good tool to be used as a teaching pedagogy in different educational institutions and high school also. I think it's a matter of time, if you ask me. It's just a matter of time.
Brilliant. Doug, if you agree, I'll take in one more question and then hand over to you. So this is for Tahmida. One of our attendees is asking, what is the intensity of business simulation games in higher education in Bangladesh? Basically, has it really penetrated the market, or what is the potential? Tahmida.
Yeah, I think potentially Bangladesh is investing a lot in startups, as well as a lot of technology graduates are coming out in the Bangladesh hub. I think the intensity of simulation is the fact that at least I've seen in my classes, students are very, they're not receptive towards technology. They want to really learn a lot more. They want to basically have a platform where they're learning more of technology. So I think it's just also, I'll say it's a matter of time how effectively the educator actually brings in technology and implements it into the classroom. I think the intensity depends on the fact motivated and in getting into the immersive learning of using technology like simulation or experiential simulation based education. So generally it depends on the educator as well as the students. They need to be really open to learning a lot more from technology, so to speak.
Great. Doug, would you have any questions for Shashank?
I'm wondering, since we're kind of running down in time, what I'm curious from each of them is the kind of their view of the future. So much has happened in the last 6 months that's kind of transformed our thinking about what's going to be that future. All of these disruptive technologies suddenly now are being utilized. So I'm wondering, a year from now, for all of you, and maybe as part of a wrap up, could you each just take 30 seconds or a minute and say, what are you expecting the progress to be made in these areas in the next year? And then is there anything else that you want to cover or anything else you want to summarize in terms of your part of the presentation? And maybe if we start with Dr. Agrawal, could you kind of give us your thoughts on that point?
Well, I think we are not going to be the same again what we were pre-COVID. We will see online becoming or hybrid models becoming exceedingly large. I know people, faculty colleagues in my B school are talking about not going back physically to the class and are happy to maintain it online. I do see simulations and other electronic digital tools being used more extensively. I'd like to quote Mr. Nadella from Microsoft when he said a few months ago that what we expected to be happening in 2 years' time now is happening in 2 months. So the entire rate of disruption has just got compressed in a very short period of time where people are forced to or are more receptive to newer tools. And you can see the impact of that happening in the next 6 months' time. So I think there are exciting times ahead. The only challenge is that the faculty, and I don't say this, I just make it as a point, no offense to anybody, but I see faculty lagging behind in using digital technology because Gen Next, the participants will be much more receptive and there will be some holdouts amongst the faculty who are resistant to actually using new technology and they will be left behind is what I suspect will happen. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
So I'm sure it's the same in corporate world, right? And in the business world, that there are some companies that are not going to take up this, and obviously many are. So you've got the same issue in business world, don't you?
I would tend to disagree a little bit because corporate world is much more competitive, and because of the hire and fire policies and the need to be as savvy as your nearest competitor would bring some kind of bar of equality amongst all of them, whereas universities will be more traditional and slow to change because of their certification and their reputations, and as a result of which we will see that the need to change will be much lower in universities than in corporates.
That makes a lot of sense.
I hope I'm wrong, but I hope I'm wrong though. But I think I see that as happening.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Tamita, what do you think? What's the future look like? And then do you have any other closing comments?
Thanks, Doug. I think for me, I envision the future to have more collaborative projects from the industry and the educational institutions. I feel what COVID-19 really did was make it very apparent to the educators as well as the corporate people that there is a huge gap, the acquired knowledge and skills versus the required knowledge and skills. I think there's a huge gap that has been realized at this point in time. And in the future, I feel there's going to be an array of collaborative projects with the academics as well as the corporates, bringing them together. And there's one I'm planning on right now, but that's still in the education process. But I think a lot of educators must be thinking along those lines, because everything's virtual and it makes more sense to get more interesting people on board and conduct the classes and make it more interactive. So that's how I envision the future post-COVID.
One just quick question, possibly, because we don't have much time, but one of the things in your biography, you talked about the medical tourism industry and you doing some work, and it almost sounded beyond training, that it was almost, you're using it as a brainstorming. And maybe I misunderstood that, but are there some other aspects of these technologies that we can consider in the brainstorming process as well?
Yes, so I am doing a paper on medical tourism to India. I'm doing it with one of my supervisors, and basically it's on the extent to which the world has become a global village. I think for every research, it has become very multidisciplinary, where you are taking parts from business, marketing, you're taking parts from psychology, you're taking parts from even medical sector, and you're trying to blend everything in together. What's really interesting is how people really go ahead and try and do medical tourism, in the sense that they go to the neighboring countries because they feel that they're part of your country itself, and there's basically a reallocation of resources and capital. That's what I'm trying to look into, especially in terms of the medical sector. There is a common back and forth of using the same technology. There's this group of people that goes on for training in India and then comes back and implements it into the private medical hospital in Bangladesh. So that is an interesting study, because that also leads us to further quantify if medical sector is something that is really merging in with the business education. Essentially, that's what I'm trying to figure out from the paper.
Okay, very, very interesting. Shashank, how about you? 6 months into the pandemic, we've made all this progress. What's it going to look like in 6 months? And also recap anything else that we should know.
Sure, Doug. So my understanding is, I'll take the corporate side of things. I think Mr. Rajiv and Ms. Tamita spoke about education at length, and they also touched a little bit upon the corporate side, but I'll speak on the corporate side, right? So my understanding is, see, we are already witnessing that a lot of the workforce is, working online. They're working remotely. Work from home has become a new norm, and it is the normal. It is the current normal. And the way I look at things, changing completely from the pre-COVID world, is that the majority of the workforce will actually be working online. Now, what I mean by that is, I just want to clarify that this is only happening for where there is a possibility that the online work is possible, right? Now, there are some critical tasks which cannot take place, and you'll have to be present on field, and those obviously are exceptions, right? But having said that, I believe that most of the people that are employed at one of the IT companies, for example, which forms a huge chunk in India, right? These people will be working online. And interestingly, I was having this conversation with one of my colleagues just a few days back, and we were discussing how how corporate can actually advantage from this COVID situation, in the sense that they would have always wanted to run this experiment where they see that their employees work from home, so they can save a lot of real estate and utilities and other costs as such. But then if they had asked their employees to do that in a pre-COVID world, they might have received flack, because nobody wants to work from home. But now there is a necessity, so this experiment is running on its own, and it has some demonstrable facts and figures. So once they have those numbers, I think if it is a huge saving, which we honestly expect it to be, I don't see a reason why companies would not promote this culture.
So very good point.
Yeah, so that is what I'm looking at right now, and maybe the room that I'm sitting in is my office for the rest of my life. I don't know.
Yeah, there's worse occurrences, I'm sure. Priya, how about you? What would you like to summarize and be as our last summarizer?
Thank you so much for putting the pressure again to be the last person, because that makes me really go far deep and think and fetch something that these people have not already spoken. So thank you for doing that. I think not just the corporate, but the entire world has seen the power of the power of virtual reality and what all we can do despite not being present physically and just being online, and what all we can achieve. There's no doubt that this is there to stay. And there used to be a time where people used to talk about developing interpersonal skills and communication skills. I think we'll have to take all of that, move it to a virtual setting, and now we'll all have to start rebuilding those virtual skills. And this goes for all of us, not just the students or people who are just entering the corporate world. It goes for everybody, that we need to start developing those good virtual skills and effective virtual communication skills. I think that is what we need to look forward to.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'd like to turn the program over to Maimun for final comments.
Oh, amazing. I thought we'd keep the pressure on Priya. But brilliant. I think our panelists spoke for themselves. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Doug, always a pleasure to co-host with you. I'd again like to take one last moment, apart from our 2 chapters. Thank you to ICE Business Times and our other partner, NCFG, for bringing us the Let's Disrupt series. We hope to have another one in October, in the middle of October. So we'll catch you there. And we want you to be global and unstoppable all the time.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Speakers, you were all amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for being such a lovely host.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you very much. Have a good rest of your evening. Everybody else, have a good rest of your Friday. Take care, everybody.